Hey guys, I'm Lex and welcome to Words of This Life.
I'm gonna run, and even if I fall, I know I'll be safe in my skin. Hey, hey, hey.
In today's video, I'm going to show you guys the process of how I make our CBD oil at home. My daughter is 5 and she has juvenile arthritis. She was diagnosed about 3 years ago and she's been on CBD oil for about 2 years now, maybe a little bit over 2 years. And we have a brand that we love and that I trust, but I wondered if it would be cheaper to make at home and if it would still be as effective. So I started buying hemp flower and then decarboxylating it and then infusing it into MCT oil. So that is what the process is. Before we get started, I'm going to explain just a couple of things real quick to help maybe make some sense of the video. So when you have flower, cannabis flower, hemp flower in this case, the form that the CBD is in is CBDA. And in order for that to turn into CBD, it has to be heated to a certain temperature for a certain period of time to essentially activate the cannabinoids that are in it, not just the CBD, but the other ones as well. So the process of decarboxylation is taking the flower and changing the CBDA or THCA, if someone is using marijuana flower, into CBD or THC. And to accomplish that, I'm going to be decarboxylating in a pot of water with a device called a Sous Vide. A Sous Vide device essentially heats the water to a specific temperature and then it stays at that temperature. Now, if you have not heard of a Sous Vide before, it's really, really awesome. We've cooked a bunch of food in it before. Some of the best burgers that I've ever had have come from a sous vide cooker, because what's happening is you're putting whatever you're cooking into a water bath. So you vacuum seal the meat or veggies or whatever else you're cooking, and then you put that in the water bath. And when you take it out after it's cooked, it has all of its juices, all of its flavor left still in the meat or in whatever else it is that you're cooking. So it is an awesome method of cooking, and it's kind of foolproof. So for people like me who tend to overcook things because I'm afraid of undercooking, it's really, really great to have a sous vide. So if you haven't heard of that before, you'll know that's what the device is that I am using. So it's actually 2 steps. So we're going to decarboxylate the flour first at a certain temperature, which I'll talk about that in the video, for a certain period of time. And then once that is decarboxylated or activated after it's been heated, we're going to infuse the decarboxylated flour into the MCT oil. You can use butter, you can use olive oil, you can use regular coconut oil. There's a lot of different ways to infuse, and that will sit in the water bath again at a certain temperature for a certain period of time. When that is done, we're going to strain all of the plant matter out, and what's left is the oil. That is your CBD oil. Okay, so let's get started. If you guys have any questions, please let me know in the comment section, and I'm going to go ahead and link to the sous vide cooker that we have, as well as the place that I get my hemp flour from. Okay, so here are the supplies that I'm going to be using for the first part. I have my hemp flour, I have a scale with a plate on it for weighing, I have a vacuum sealer and a roll of vacuum sealing bags, have a pot of water, and the Anova Sous Vide cooker. That's that device over there hanging on the pot. And here's a close-up of the hemp that I'm using. It's from Happy Flower Company. This one is Berry Blossom. I have another strain that is called Wife that is pictured on the stovetop with the other supplies. This is a great company if you need hemp flower. They have excellent product, excellent customer service. I would highly, highly recommend them. All right, so before I weigh out my flour, I'm going to prepare the vacuum bags. And what I'm doing here is adding some rocks to the bottom of the bag. And this is something that I saw someone else do in a video. Actually, they used knives. They put metal knives into the bottom and sealed them in there separately from the flour. And this was supposed to help weigh it down. Now, the rocks did not end up working for me. So part of the way through the cooking, I ended up cutting them out, and I had to clamp the bags down a different way. So I'm not sure if I just didn't use something heavy enough, or really the amount of flour that I have in there is pretty lightweight. So the rocks were kind of hanging down and the flour was kind of bubbling up out of the water, which we can't have. The flour needs to be surrounded by the water. So I ended up doing something different, but just so you know, this is an option, and this is how I prepare the bags, just usually without the rocks. And here I had measured out 10 grams of the first strain, the berry blossom, and I'm going to break it up. Most of what I've read says that it doesn't need to be super finely ground, so I just try to break it up with my fingers the best I can. However, there are some people that grind it into almost a powder before decarbing it. And I'm going to speed this up a little bit here so you don't have to watch me do this for 5 minutes. Again, I just try to break it up the best I can with my fingers. And then once it's broken up, I'm going to pour it into the vacuum bag and then seal it and then get it into the pot. All right, so for the decarboxylation step, the sous vide cooker is going to need to be at 200 degrees. So you can see that it's ready here, and you can see that I'm clipping the bags into the pot. As I mentioned, this did not end up working. The rocks at the bottom were kind of sinking down, and then the flour was floating up above the water. So I ended up changing this and using large metal tongs to clip the bags all the way down, and that worked. This little silicone lid thing I just put on the top to help keep the temperature because it can kind of fluctuate by a couple of degrees if the heat is able to get out easily. I like to decarb at 200 degrees for an hour and a half. There are some people that do 203 degrees for an hour, so a little bit higher temp but less time. I just like the idea of low and slow, kind of like with cooking anything, so I do it this way. Okay, so much to my dismay, as I moved on to step 2 of the process, which is the infusion part of the process, I thought that I was recording a video, and it turns out that I had only taken a picture. So there's some things missing here, and I will try to explain it the best I can without you being able to watch the video. So after the flour was done and decarbed, I cut the bags open, and then I had previously measured out some MCT oil in 2 different jars, one for each strain. So I poured the decarbed flour while it was hot still into the oil, and then the next step is to put the put the jars into the water. So worth noting is that the water for this stage needs to be at 185 degrees for 4 hours. So if you remember from before, it was at 200 degrees. So you actually have to give the water some time to cool off a little bit. And then once it's at 185, you put the jars in. Now, a problem that I've had with the jars is that they tend to float as well. And just like with the bags, you need to have it completely surrounded by the water so that it can fully infuse into the oil. And so what I do is take a piece of folded up tinfoil and wrap it around the jars right under the lid. And then I take the tail that's left over from the tinfoil and clip it to the side of the pot. And you can see that here in the picture. So that helps the jars to stay put during the entire time of cooking. And then again, you're going to need this to be at 185 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 hours. So after the infusion is done, it's been cooking at 185 degrees for 4 hours. You're going to take it out and then get ready to move on to the next step where you squeeze out the oil into the bottles. And you can see that I have those supplies there on the counter. And one thing that I want to say about why I like to decarboxylate in the sous vide with the vacuum bag and jar method is because there's hardly any smell at all. So the first time I ever did this, I decarboxylated in the oven. It stunk up the house really, really bad. So this is a much better option. Okay, this is the last part of the process, and for the sake of time, I am going to speed it up just a little bit, but what I'm doing here is I've folded up the cheesecloth a few times. You want to get as many layers of the cheesecloth as you can so that the oil will strain through, but none of the plant part pieces. And then you're going to squeeze it out, get as much of the oil out of it as you possibly can. You can squeeze it. I use tongs. You could use 2 spoons. I tend to use my hands toward the end of it. Just to squeeze as much of it out of there as you can. And then you'll set that aside. And then I always like to pour it into a smaller container so that I can measure, so I can see exactly how much oil I came out with. So this was 1.5 ounces, but I had started with 2 ounces of oil. So you do lose some of the oil in the process. So you want to take that into consideration when you're doing the math for how much oil you're going to use and how many milligrams of CBD you used and all of that, which I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. And so this was just the first strain. I got 1.5 ounces of oil total from that one, and then I just did the same thing with the other strain. There was less of that because I started with a smaller amount of oil, but I also used less flour. And that is that. That's the whole process. And here is a picture of the finished oil. So we started with clear MCT oil, and then after the infusion, it is this nice planty, earthy green color. And then we take these drops sublingually. So people can turn it into butter, they can turn it into cooking oil. There's a lot of different ways that you can infuse and a lot of different things that you can use infusions for. But in this case for us, we use the oil sublingually. So I want to go ahead and talk about the math now to let you know how I came up with these numbers. So the strain, this is just specifically for the berry blossom strain, and it would be the same just with different numbers for the other strain. So I'm just using this one as an example. So that strain tests at 15%. 15% equals 150 milligrams per gram. So I used 10 grams, so we could assume that there's 1,500 milligrams of CBD in the amount that we made. So I made 1.5 ounces of oil. That was just for this strain. There was some for the other strain too, but I'm not including that in this because I did the two strains separately. And 1.5 ounces is 44 milliliters. Now 1 milliliter is 20 drops. So if you have 44 milliliters times 20 equals 880 drops total. And then you divide the amount of milligrams by the amount of drops. So 1,500 milligrams divided by 880 drops equals approximately 1.7 milligrams of CBD per drop. And the reason that's important is because you can know how to dose correctly, and whether you are using this for CBD or whether you are using it for medical marijuana oil, you need to know that so that you can dose properly and know how much you're getting. So this would be the same kind of math. You do need to know the percentage of CBDA that is in the flower, and then some of it is probably lost in the process of this. I have read a few different things where when you decarboxylate in the sous vide, that it has a really, really, really high rate of transfer. So the CBDA would transfer at a high rate into the CBD, or the THCA would have a high transfer rate into THC. So this is just an approximation, but it is a lot better than just guessing. And then in this case, I have a certificate of analysis that came with the hemp that I ordered, but I also have a testing kit that tests the flower, and it tested at 15%, which is what the certificate of analysis said, or the lab report. So it all lined up. That's where I'm getting that 15% number from. If you don't know that, then it's going to be a lot harder to do the math on this, but you could also just read about the specific strain that you're buying and see where that tends to fall on the percentages. However, I would definitely recommend getting your flour or your oil from a place that can provide a lab report or certificate of analysis so that you can know what's in it, not just the CBD or THC amount, but to know that it's not loaded with pesticides or heavy metals, and to know a little bit more about the terpenes if they provide that as well, because terpenes are super fascinating and they change the effects of the oil depending on which ones are in there. Terpenes are what are found in essential oils. So if you've always wondered if essential oils are snake oil or not, they're not, because they are loaded with terpenes, and there's a lot of science behind terpenes showing that they do a number of different things. So it's always good to know where your stuff is coming from and what is in it. All right, so that's it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know this isn't one of my regular videos, but this is such a big part of our lives and we use it daily, so I thought that I would go ahead and share the process here for anyone who might be interested. Okay, I'll see you guys next time on Words of This Life. Thanks for watching.